One of the things I find fascinating is how much we actually get by, or how little actually we get by, with just little tidbits of knowledge within this world, right? And most of us, get by with very little knowledge about different things and understanding, and that is completely fine, right? Like we think that we understand the world, right? Like even if somebody studies a world for a long time in a specific area, they really still don't know that much. But I mean, if you think about the general public, and in general public, I'm generalizing across a lot of people, and I'm also generalizing into specific knowledge areas, right? So I would probably at this point have considered an expert on, um, strategy and innovation. I guess. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of weird to consider myself that, but in the sort of grander scheme of things, I guess. Um, but across the board, what I find interesting is like even in myself, I think about different areas of life, how little I actually know, but I'm still, functional, I guess, to get through and to actually understand things, um, to actually live. And it's just really fascinating, right? Like, um, so I wouldn't, I've never taken anatomy courses, for example, and yet I'm functional enough to get by. I've never taken a course on geopolitics, for example, and yet I'm functional and coherent to get by. And, one vital part of that is the news and the internet. And I think that's been really interesting and how things have evolved in the last little bit, in the last 10 years, towards less sort of news, factual news, and more of discussion. But, that aside, we still get most of our understanding by these little tidbits that come by, the sort of 30-second sound bites, the, brief reading through something. And most of us don't sit down, and consider something like if you read an Atlantic article, I don't know if you've ever seen one, or, an Economist article. They're quite lengthy and detailed. Most of us don't do that. And we're never going to do that kind of stuff, right? Like, we're not going to go through all of those details. Um, for me to ask students, for example, to read through some of that stuff is just, so it's just not plausible. So, how do I function given this, right? We have this sort of smattering of knowledge and little tidbits of knowledge. I think most of us, including myself, generally have a not very good understanding of how things actually work. And yet we have kind of like a functional understanding in our given day of how to get things done. And we don't need to know everything. In fact, that's probably kind of a good thing that we don't spend all of our time studying and reading up, about everything that we possibly do and make choices. We just need to know how to get something done, a sort of functional, getting one thing done after another. And the other thing is that even though a lot of this stuff is important, and I completely understand and sympathize with people that study geopolitics, for example, or anatomy or whatever. I completely understand it for the day to day, and even business, for example, or strategy, the day to day. We don't need to understand a great deal about those particular topics. We don't need to go into um, the all these different kinds of areas. Right? That's kind of unrealistic in a lot of ways, because we just need a functional knowledge to get by. Now, the challenge is it's not it has nothing to do with intelligence, right? Like that there's plenty of people that um, are highly intelligent, and they just have a functional understanding of the way that the world works, right? Like just like the they don't really need to go into a lot of details, and they're plenty fine, and they do extremely well, right? And the thing I think is not necessarily having that knowledge that's important, and it's not necessarily the key thing, but a um, having an mindedness of, if you don't have a knowledge in a specific area and you run into a moment where you don't understand it, to brush up or get a somewhat working understanding of what things are going on. I think that that is more important than spending all our time studying different things and understanding how the world actually works. Like, we don't need to be an encyclopedia or a Wikipedia, right? In today's sort of environment, we don't need to understand absolutely everything, and that is untenable. But what we do need to understand is that if there's an anomaly, if there's something weird that happens, that we probably should brush up a little bit on what's going on. To the extent of what that little bit is, I guess that's person to person, and it's very specific, but it's still somewhat important. I guess if there's a saliency or an importance sort of criteria, and if it actually affects your life, I guess that's an important part of what we should actually tackle. But this is the thing. This is the sort of interestingness that we have, is most of us are very, very much generalists in all parts of our lives. Most of us don't even really have a working understanding of many parts of our lives, right? Like, I don't sit and think about how a computer functions every day, right? Like, I know kind of the basics of it, but I'm not going to sit down and think about the sort of um, machine code that goes on behind the scenes. So what I'm saying is, you don't necessarily need to know a lot, and you might not necessarily need to know specifics, but I think we need to have a bit of an openness whenever something goes on, to be able to pay attention to it. And the degree of what that is, I don't know. But I find it very fascinating that society, the sort of system that we live in, society is like, I don't like that term because it sort of blankets everything, but the sort of system that we live in, that we're still functional and that we still accomplish things and things get done. It's pretty remarkable in how that actually happens, and how something actually gets done despite us not knowing that much. And I think that's cool. And I think that sort of says something, that the broader system, the broader organization, the sort of the the bigger scheme of things matters a lot, and yet we never really understand that bigger scheme of things, of how we're connected and what we actually do. It's very, very important, and in fact, we'll never be able to understand. I think it's entirely too complicated to sit down and try to understand and model everything, but it's an important part of our life. So, all right, take care and have a wonderful day.